Rising up the ranks in the Japanese imperial court was like a walk in the park at night. It was a system that kept the powerful in power and left everyone else out. Many government jobs were controlled by families who handed them down father to son. But there was one way to sneak into the government that I almost never hear anyone talk about. Not only did this method lead to the downfall of one of the strongest clans in Japanese history, it was the best way for women from weak, no-name families to rise all the way to the top, even to a level right next to the emperor's ear. It all began in Japan's Heian period. This clan, called the Fujiwara, ruled the court. They famously married their daughters into the imperial family, allowing them control over the Heian court for 200 years. Fujiwara men kept an iron grip on the title of regent, a job that let them rule in the emperor's place. So they were off running the country while their cute puppet emperors pranced around participating in festivals and prayer services, praying for things like good harvests, a little peace, and maybe a little less Fujiwara in their lives. Emperors like to be out of power as much as ramen likes to be out of broth. But what could they do? The court suffered from a severe lack of loyal allies. Normally, an emperor would marry someone from another strong clan, but every time they swiped left on a Fujiwara daughter, another Fujiwara daughter just took her place, with her daddy standing right behind her like, "Here, how about this one?" Or else. Emperors didn't want to piss off the clan ruling over their court. But then, after their targeted prayers failed, emperors found a clever workaround to escape the Fujiwara bubble. Nannies. They started shipping their kids off to the homes of wet nurses to be raised there. This practice, and others, slowly pried the Fujiwara's death grip off the court. The word for wet nurse is menoto. Literally means milk mother. No, it wasn't some dairy-based superhero, unfortunately. These were women who breastfed and raised kids for other people. Each little prince or princess was assigned one or more menoto. It was a win-win for the wet nurse and her ward, the child she took care of. A wet nurse and a child usually formed a strong, lasting emotional bond, the type you can only get from some suction applied to an extra lump of skin. A menoto and her family had the child's trust, even after the child grew up, and trust is a mighty weapon. Any political influence the milk child gained carried over to the menoto as well. It wasn't just breastfeeding, it was power feeding. When cute little baby emperor grew up, he would have loyal non-Fujiwara allies, and since his success was their success, the menoto family would fight tooth and teat for him. This was milk power, one of the best ways a low-ranking family climbed the court ladder. Children were often closer to their wet nurses than their own mothers. One woman had to leave her milk mama and wrote, "Her face, still vivid in my memory, made me so sad that even the sight of the moon could not console me, and I went to bed wilted with sorrow." How did wet nurses steal the affections of these kids? Well, it might have something to do with the way they raised the kids. Both sons and daughters could have wet nurses. Some imperial princes had up to 4. Every day was a buffet. Menoto were usually well educated, but they tended to come from low-ranking court families. Wet nurses seemed to have really loved their milk children. They did things like sleeping in the same futon as them, comforting them after a nightmare, and teaching them. When traveling, kids stayed in the same carts as their wet nurses, not their biological mothers. Sure, your mother might give you life, but what is life compared to bedtime stories and warm cuddles? People believed that when a kitsune, a fox spirit, wanted to kidnap a child, it would shapeshift into the child's menoto, because it was more believable for the menoto to be hanging around the child rather than the mother. By the 1300s, most nobles loved their kids so much they outsourced the whole parenting thing. Why do the work when you can give it to a professional? It might sound weird, but people clowned on you if you spent too much time with your kids. Where's Aki? Oh, she's at her son's ball game? Ha! What's she gonna do next week? Attend his graduation? An aristocrat once commented on young Emperor Antoku's mother. He said she should not appear as if she were a wet nurse, carrying the emperor in the same carriage. But there was one high-ranking lady who shined like a star to her daughter, because she was very distant. When her daughter got sick, she said that before then, "I had never thought of her with either affection or sorrow. Occasionally, I thought about how old she would be, but it puzzled me that I could never recapture the longing I felt when I glimpsed her that first night," meaning the night of her daughter's birth. "Goodbye, mother. I'll never forget the day you asked how old I was." It's funny because wet nurses always said their bond with their wards was like the bond between a mother and child, even though it was probably stronger than that of the actual mother. People said milk mothers had unconditional love, while blood parents were cold and calculating. Soon, it wasn't just emperors doing it. The nobles in court and warriors in the provinces hopped on the wet nurse train too. Milk is thicker than blood. Back then, you couldn't truly trust your siblings. Why? Well, let's say you're eyeing that tall guy in class with a cute smile, and you see across the room another girl also drooling at him. Would you trust that bitch? A family could only have one head, and a state could only have one emperor. The upper class of society was a den of snakes. Siblings and cousins were all competing to become the heir to their house, or the crown prince to the throne. Sure, big brother Kenzo might have protected you from the neighborhood bullies, but when you're eyeing that seat at the head of the table, all you can think about is the time that asshole wrote you a love letter pretending it was from Aiko with the pretty eyes. Instead, milk children formed closer bonds with their breast siblings, the children of their menoto, so close that it sometimes caused problems. When you put boys and girls together and they're at that hormonal age, it's only a matter of time before some milk starts to flow. It's okay, they weren't related by blood, only by milk. Now, if a male ward got his breast sister pregnant, no one would bat an eye. Maybe they'd just offer a polite cough or two. The child could go on to become part of the highborn family. But if a female ward got knocked up by her boob brother, oh hell nah, she might as well have tossed her uterus in the trash because that thing was tainted beyond repair. Aiko, how could you? I can no longer show my face at court. Oh, the shame of not having anyone to marry into the imperial family. One imperial princess got pregnant by her menoto's son. It didn't end with bebe showers and a gender reveal. It ended with a death reveal. Hers. I assume she took her own life due to the shame. So wet nurses watched their milk daughters like hawks. For their work, menoto were rewarded with rice, lands, and even horses. But there was one form of payment that was worth more than all of those combined. It turned nobodies into somebodies. Now, wet nurses mostly came from families at the bottom of the court, people who were in charge of lowly duties, such as laughing at their colleagues' jokes and complimenting their poetry. My lord, the way you compare life to a cucumber makes the other poets seem like newcomers. Imagine being a low-ranking woman, your life full of fake smiles and polite bows, and all of a sudden you're asked to take care of the emperor's son. It'd be like winning the lottery. Long-lost friends and family suddenly get rescued and find their way home. And even all those rice and land rewards were like mere Canadian dollars compared to a currency that's actually valuable, called influence. Wet nurses turned that influence into power and profit. When a woman became a wet nurse, her entire family leveled up. She knew she had made it. It was written in her diary. Her biological children often landed government positions. Plus, the definition of a menoto's child was more flexible than George R.R. Martin's release dates. Like a nephew could have been called her son, or even a second cousin once removed, if you squinted a little. Her relatives also received lands and titles. One menoto's brother became the governor of Tanba province at the age of 10, which was terrible news for his cousins. Oh, you got an A, son? Why can't you get a province like your cousin? But it wasn't all fun and games. Navigating the court was like climbing Mount Everest. You have to deal with a lot of crap. And it was dangerous. As menoto, you wanted your ward to succeed. And if the kid was a boy, you wanted him at the head of the house or on the throne. An emperor or a noble likely had many sons, each with a wet nurse or 4, all of them fighting to get their wards to the top. Because if a child became the heir, he and his menoto got to live in the main family house, a huge boost to their influence. But when a mole rises too high, it gets whacked. Everyone knew menoto families were super loyal to their patrons. If the patron family had enemies, and they always did, nobles who lacked enemies also lacked a good judge of character. If the patron family had enemies, it forced the wet nurse's family to carry a big target on their backs. Whole menoto families have been wiped out in one conflict or another. Now, even though milk power was strong, especially when fortified with politics, there was one huge problem with it. Yeah, milk is thicker than blood, but it evaporates quickly. Now you may be thinking, does milk really evaporate faster than blood? I think you just made that up for the metaphor. Well, my dad once told me, when you say something, say it with confidence. So let me tell you, with confidence, shut the fuck up. The first thing a wet nurse did when her ward became the crown prince or the heir to his house was to seek out all of the eligible bachelors and bachelorettes of the court, because she had to find people to marry her children ASAP. She knew that her family's ride in first class was limited, because once her milk child died, all her influence died with him. If she wanted a bright future for her family, she needed a marriage pact with some other powerful families in court. Bonds of marriage were weaker than those of milk, but they lasted longer. This was easier said than done. True-born nobles looked down on families of the milk, like they had just stepped out of a rice paddy barefoot into court. Someone from a menoto family who married into a noble house was often seen as marrying above their station. Some wet nurses did manage to land profitable marriages and went on to establish lasting lineages of their own, but the members of those lineages were often mocked, and such families were always at risk of being excluded and wiped out. Over time, menoto became a part of the system they had snuck into, which resulted in the rise of wet nurse husbands and wet nurse fathers, but we can talk about those another time. So the plan by Japanese emperors to fight Fujiwara power with milk power, did it work? You bet your nipple it did. An emperor's wet nurse became one of his most trusted advisors, a counter to the Fujiwara regent. Emperors also surrounded themselves with the members of their menoto's family. Now don't think that the Fujiwara took all this lying down. In addition to offering their daughters up to marry emperors, they equipped their daughters with bottles and nursery rhymes and competed to have them be wet nurses too. But the downward spiral had already begun. Emperors were able to stick a foot outside the cracking walls of Fujiwara influence. The rise of wet nurses was one big reason for the Fujiwara's fall, but there were other reasons. Click here to learn about how the powerful Fujiwara clan came crashing down. We have a new emperor on Patreon, Elise Shaban. You are amazing. We also have some new patrons, Joshua Phil Garlic, Susan Falco, Tiff Jada, may the force be with you, Shulk, Jamie Hall, and Elevix. Thanks so much, you guys. All right, I love you, and spread the knowledge.